11 Weeks by Anna Tikva, a novel about the last days. Prologue, a dream. Was this reality or only a dream? She had been sure she had heard a trumpet blast and someone calling her name. Why was she standing all alone in the evening twilight, peering down into a dark rectangular hole? Looking up at the overturned gravestone, she could see her name eerily engraved upon it. Was she hallucinating again? So many times the morphine drip had created terrifying nightmares and strange delusions. Was this another one of the same? Curiously, she reached over to touch the cold, hard gravestone. Her fingers traced the deep, sharp curve of the letters. Verity, Jane, Lavelle. It felt real enough. She shivered in the cool August breeze. The light summer dress she was wearing was hardly adequate. It was her favorite dress, though, with blue flowers, high waistline, and puff sleeves. Reading the verse below her name, Verity remembered requesting this very passage after she had been told she had only a short time to live. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. It summarized the hope she'd clung to so tightly through her illness. Resurrection. But was she still sick and only dreaming about resurrection, or had she truly been brought back to life? Looking around the graveyard, Verity analyzed her situation. She knew where she was. The little stone chapel in the Granville Cemetery was easy to recognize, but the trees were taller. There also seemed to be many more rows of gravestones lining the gently rolling hills and disappearing into the darkness. Some graves nearby were decorated with fresh flower bouquets, while others, like her own, had only a little green shrub in front. As she scanned the shadowy surroundings, unable to see very far into the distance, hers appeared to be the only gravestone that was overturned. It certainly looked real enough. If this is for real, Verity considered, then the resurrection has taken place, which means that Jesus Christ has returned, which means that everything I believed and hoped for has begun. Could it be? Was it true? Her heart skipped a beat. Shivering with anticipation, she ran her fingers down her arm. It felt smooth and strong. There were no intravenous attachments or even any scars. If she was only dreaming, surely her hand would strike the needles. Surely she would wake herself up. Walking a few steps back and forth, she tested her legs. They felt sturdy and strong. The weakness and pain from the tumor were gone. In fact, she had no feelings of pain anywhere. Looking down, Verity noticed her abdomen was no longer distended. Touching her face, she was elated to find the swelling had disappeared. She felt whole. Running her fingers through her long dark hair, hope rose quickly in her heart. I think I'm alive again, she whispered joyfully. I think I've been brought back to life. Looking up to heaven, Verity prayed, Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing me back from the dead. You've healed me completely. This is such a miracle. And if I'm alive, this must mean that your Son has returned. You've given him the power to raise us from the grave. Your kingdom is about to be established on this earth, just as you promised so long ago. Her mind began to race. How long did I lie in that hole? Have others been raised like me? What am I to do now? Will an angel appear? Will I be taken away to judgment? She looked around, wondering what to do next. Aside from an occasional car traveling the nearby road, the cemetery was isolated, tucked away on the outskirts of town. Situated as it was in the daily bus route that had once taken her to Granville District High School, she had passed by it almost every day. To her right was the small town of Granville. To her left was the road that led home. If I were to walk, she considered, it would take me only a couple hours. I feel strong enough to walk for days. I'm sure I could do it. A smile slid over her face as she imagined knocking on her front door and announcing her resurrection. What a surprise it would be for her mother and brother to see her alive and well. But will they still be there? She asked herself. How long has it been? Will they be ready for Jesus' return? Have they had time to search out truth and believe? And what about Peter? The smile quickly vanished from her face as Verity thought about Peter Bryant. He had been one of her best friends in high school. They had become very close, and then she discovered she had cancer. Sadly, she remembered his anger toward God. She remembered begging him to have faith as he sat beside her during the last dark days, looking so haggard, so forlorn, so terribly distressed. I love Peter. I wanted to help him believe in this day, this very day, this day that I think I am now experiencing. What has happened to Peter and everyone I love? My brother Thomas only started asking questions about God when he heard I had cancer. Did he continue to seek for truth? And my mom, my lovely mother who stood strong through a difficult marriage and worked so hard to support us, did she ever find time to read the Bible? Heavenly Father, what has happened to them? Verity asked. Did they turn to you for help? Did they accept the call of the gospel to be baptized? If this is truly the time of the resurrection and not just a wonderful dream, then it must be now too late for anyone to change. Jesus Christ is here at last. We're all about to be called away. A mosquito bit her on the arm, and Verity slapped at it. Mesmerized, she wiped away the blood that splattered on her skin. It was all completely real. A real mosquito, real blood, and the slap hadn't altered her state of consciousness. Fully convinced now that this was no hallucination, she kneeled down and prayed even more earnestly. With all my heart, Lord, I thank you for bringing me back to life. You've kept your promises. I am so thankful that the fulfillment of all things is here at last. I have longed for this day. Please, dear Lord, show me what I am to do now. Where do I go? Please help me find the ones I love. Before she could say another word, there stood right beside her, as if he had been there all along, a young man in shining white robes, unnaturally bright against the purple evening sky. He held a trumpet in his hand. Sincerity and love shone from his face. Instinctively, she bowed to the ground, covering her face. As much as she had expected an angel to appear, it was still a great shock to be so close to the divine. Do not be afraid, the angel reassured her kindly. Jesus Christ has called you back to life. Reaching out, the angel took her hand. As he pulled her to her feet, Verity trembled. She was completely awestruck. Come with me, the angel said with compassion. We must visit your mother and brother and... The angel looked at Verity and smiled. And Peter Bryant. Have they all turned to God? Verity asked anxiously. How long have I been dead? Are they ready for Jesus Christ's return? Come and see, was his reply. "11 weeks earlier. Chapter 1. The Final Performance. It was the last scene of the final performance, the scene which Zach Bryant enjoyed most of all. Tall, well-built, and handsome, he had been taking intensive dance lessons for the last couple of months. It had all been for this, the 3 sold-out performances on the last weekend of May. As his feet followed the rhythm of the music underneath the bright spotlight, Zach knew he was executing the final scene better than ever. The audience cheered as he came to a striking pose right where he needed to be, right in front of Melissa. Only she wasn't Melissa in the musical, she was Vanessa Van Houston, and he was Marco Daronet. She looked gorgeous, dancing on the table in a blue ruffled 60s skirt and white peasant blouse. With her ginger brown hair and a curly ponytail, she was looking at him in that rapturous way that always filled him with hope. It wasn't hard to lock eyes with her, just like the drama teacher had instructed. Soon, he was certain that she would ditch Shane Lockwood and be his. Melissa spun around and jumped. Reaching out his arms, he caught her perfectly in midair. The whirly-bird catch, as she fondly called it, was the most difficult move of all. With one sweeping motion, Zach brought her feet to touch the floor, and then with arms outstretched, they twirled 3 times in flawless synchronization. The audience cheered again and again as Vanessa Van Houston and Marco Daronet performed the dance that had taken months to perfect. Unfortunately, most of Zach's practices had been on Sunday mornings. Because of this, his parents, Andrew and Lisa Bryant, disapproved of his involvement in the musical and had told him so repeatedly. Even Uncle James, an uncle that he highly respected, questioned the change of priorities.
"You've missed almost every Sunday school class, Zach," he'd
implored.
"God needs to come first."
However, the last few months of Zach's grade 12 year had been his most enjoyable. Being a lead in the high school musical uncovered his hidden talents. He had always done well in sports, but just the other day, the dance teacher had told him that he was a natural. And Ms. Allen, the drama teacher, loved his voice. Zach had never been allowed to attend school dances during the 4 years he had attended Sterling High. He wondered if his father was surprised by his abilities or upset that he had developed them. In actual fact, he was very surprised that his parents had come to watch the final performance. It was a Sunday evening. Grandma, Uncle James, and Aunt Sandra were in the audience too. Brett and Jana were there as well, but that was a given. Brett was always supportive and understanding. The music slowed and Zach focused his thoughts. As he and Melissa came together in center stage, a new song began to play. Breathing heavily, Zach was thankful their voices had been previously recorded and were now playing back over the speakers. All they had to do was lip sync until they caught their breath. "I'll be yours," Melissa's smooth, clear voice rang out across the audience, "till the end of time." Melissa's voice was the only voice Zach ever wanted to hear. When they sang the song, in his mind, she was truly singing to him.
"No one will ever break us apart,"
he replied in perfect harmony.
"Hear that, Shane?" he thought.
Zach loved the way they were so perfectly in step with one another. Melissa knew right where she should be. There was no awkwardness or hesitation. And then, as the lights dimmed and the music faded, came the best part of all. Pulling Melissa close, he bent over and kissed her. Ms. Allen said it had to be a long kiss, and Zach was very willing to oblige. Cheering loudly, the crowd gave them a standing ovation. All the actors poured onto the stage, joined hands, and bowed to the audience. The clapping intensified. Melissa looked up at Zach with tears in her eyes. "That was the best ever," she said. "You were amazing." He squeezed her hand.
"So were you," he said earnestly. "As always."
All the actors bowed again. The school band struck up a marching song. With Zach and Melissa taking the lead, everyone filed off stage toward the dressing rooms. They were still holding hands as they walked down the darkened hallway with the rest of the actors. "I'm so sad it's all over," Melissa told him, staying close by his side. "It's been so much fun."
"It doesn't have to be over,"
he smiled down meaningfully. She looked up confused, but then seemed to understand his message. "Zach," she started to say, but the drama teacher was rushing toward them. "Fantastic," Ms. Allen raved. "You both outperformed yourselves tonight. You brought the whole musical to life. You made it so real. I'm so proud of you. Your parents must be bursting with pride." Melissa nodded happily. Her parents had supported her from the very beginning. They paid for professional dance lessons and vocal training at the best music academy in Stirling, Nova Scotia. Zach grimaced. He wasn't sure what his parents were going to think. He'd had to pay for everything himself. Taking part in the musical was not something his parents had encouraged. So many people wanted to meet Zach and congratulate him on his wonderful performance that it took a long time to reach the back of the auditorium where his family stood waiting. Somewhere along the way, Melissa parted from him in a different direction, and he still didn't know what she wanted to say. That was all right. He could text her later as long as he was sure she wasn't with Shane. Brett and Jenna met him before he reached his parents. Brett had been Zach's basketball coach since grade 9. With Brett, Zach shared some memorable victories.
"Fantastic,"
Brett said, thumping him on the back.
"Zach, I had no idea you were such a superstar."
"You could go into acting," Jenna agreed. "Seriously, you'd be a sensation." Zach was flattered.
"Thanks,"
he said.
"It was a lot of fun."
Looking ahead, he could see that his family was getting restless.
"I'd better catch up with my folks. They're waiting to take me home." "You do that,"
Brett smiled.
and let us know when you have your next show.
Laughing, Zach reluctantly made his way to the back. Would his parents be impressed? You did do amazingly well tonight, his mum conceded as she gave him a hug. Incredible, exclaimed Esther, his young teen sister, hugging him tight.
I've been enjoying the celebrity status.
His twin brother Jake chuckled.
You wouldn't believe how many people have come congratulating me.
Zach smiled. Identical twins with tousled sandy blonde hair and hazel brown eyes, it was hard to tell them apart. Many times in their 17 years of life, they had been mistaken for one another.
God gave you plenty of talent, son.
His dad smiled, clapping him on the back. His father's compliment was a gentle reminder of several late-night conversations. Zach shrugged and began walking toward the exit. Maybe his talents were pulling him away from God, but that wasn't what Zach wanted to hear. As everyone followed him out the door, Zach asked his mom,
Where are Grandma and Uncle James and Aunt Sandra?
They waited for half an hour to talk to you, she replied with a smile, but they had to get back home. Uncle James has a client coming over tonight. They told me to tell you that they really enjoyed the show. Great performance tonight, a grade 9 girl called out, glancing shyly in the twins' direction. You must be so proud of your son, Mr. Bryant, she exclaimed to Zach's dad. And she paused, passing him a few sheets of paper. Here's the essay I was supposed to hand in Friday. I'm sorry.
Everyone did their best tonight,
Zach's dad replied evasively, taking the essay. Looking briefly at their papers, he smiled.
Unfortunately, I still have to take 5 marks off, Sarah.
But it's not Monday yet, she pleaded.
It's also not Friday.
Sarah looked disappointed. Okay. See everyone tomorrow then. All the others said polite goodbyes except Zach. Zach was disappointed by his father's lack of enthusiasm.
Why isn't Dad praising me like everybody else?
Being an English teacher at the same high school his kids attended, Zach knew his father would be inundated with many similar compliments in the next week.
Will he keep brushing everyone off so dismissively?
What a total surprise, Miss Campbell said loudly, coming down the hallway. The student who never attends school dances is the best dancer in the school. You really should be there at prom this Friday to show the other kids how to do it.
I'd love to,
Zach said cheerfully. There was probably no way he could get a ticket at this late date, but should opportunity arise, he would gladly take part. His younger sister Esther looked back at him with surprise. Jake elbowed him in the ribs as they were exiting the school.
What?
Zach exclaimed as they stepped outside. Limping a little, since spraining his ankle in a recent rugby game, Jake whispered quietly,
Now Dad will have teachers on his case.
Zach shrugged coolly.
Good. Then maybe I'll get to go.
It was a somber group that took their seats in the old family van. As Zach's dad turned the key, the news came on and his mom was instantly captivated. Another earthquake, Andrew, she exclaimed soberly, directing everyone's attention to the announcement. Sure enough, a large earthquake had taken place in China, and aftershocks were being felt hundreds of kilometers away. Earthquakes in various places, Zach's mom said to his father, making reference to the words of Jesus. Playing music on his phone, Zach stuck one earplug into his ear and gave the other to his twin. He didn't want to hear about another earthquake. There had been so many major disasters lately: earthquakes, tsunamis, massive floods, spewing volcanoes, and weird weather. At school, this was all attributed to global warming. However, his parents seemed to feel these were signs clearly anticipated by Bible prophecy to herald the return of Jesus Christ to the earth. A soft bleep alerted Zach to an incoming text. It was a message from Jaden, one of his friends from school. Awesome, was all it said, but Zach knew Jaden was referring to the musical. He smiled and texted back, Thanks. 3 more texts came in and Zach quickly responded. Watching him enviously, Jake wished he had been able to afford to take over his uncle's phone plan when he had left to do missionary work in Jamaica. Instead, he had spent all his money on a new aluminum racing bicycle. Although Zach held a smartphone in his hand, he was only able to listen to music and text, since their father had installed software that blocked the internet. They both could remember their dad exclaiming,
What? Give you unaccountable access to the World Wide Web? Are you crazy? Once that door is open, there's no telling where it will lead. I have the most conservative father in the world,
Jake thought.
But I'd be happy just to text. I must be the only student in grade 12 who still uses a landline to communicate. This summer's earnings will go towards a phone.
Another 6 Russian warships are headed for the Mediterranean? Their mother remarked, still listening to the news report. Do you realize how significant this is? She asked with a smile, looking back at the twins. The King of the North is coming down with many ships. There had been quite a fleet of Russian ships docking at the new ports they had acquired in the Mediterranean. It was occurring regularly and without incident.
Is this really evidence that Ezekiel 38 and Daniel 11 are being fulfilled?
Zach wondered. Having grown up in a family that read the Bible every day, he was fully aware that his parents had plenty of evidence that Jesus Christ would soon return. But he wasn't ready for that return, not for a few more years at least.
Surely it won't happen for a few more years.
Totally unaware that the return of Christ was only 11 weeks away, Zach looked over at his brother and rolled his eyes. Jake didn't respond. He looked away. Zach wasn't baptized, but Jake was. 3 years ago, their friend Noah had been baptized, even though they had all been young, only 14. It wasn't long afterwards that the twins had asked to take classes as well. Jake had been baptized at the early age of 15. While Zach had attended all the classes with Uncle Peter, he hadn't followed through with any commitment of his own.
It seemed so easy back then. Life wasn't so busy.
Jake pondered.
Maybe I was baptized too young.
He thought to himself.
I know it's all true. I know Jesus will come back someday. But I just don't feel any excitement anymore. It bores me stiff. I know it shouldn't, but it does.
Living only 10 minutes from Sterling High, they were almost home when Dad spoke again.
Plugs out, guys,
he said. Unwillingly, Zach and Jake cooperated.
What are you listening to?
Their dad questioned.
Just cool music,
Zach replied sullenly. He knew that his dad didn't like it when he and Jake zoned out in their own music world and became disconnected from the rest of their family.
Look, Zach,
his father said, looking up at him in the rear-view mirror.
I know that you are a very talented young man. I know that with your involvement in this play, you've truly earned lots of praise and encouragement from everyone at school. I can appreciate that you find it hard to understand why Mom and I haven't been enthused or supportive of your performance. But I just want you to remember that your parents see things a little differently. We know this world is on the verge of Jesus Christ's return because we believe the prophecies that are in the Bible. This isn't the time to be living for the moment and disconnecting from God. And,
his father added soberly,
if you're interested in some girl at school, bring her to God. Make sure she's committed to Him before you ask her to commit to you. Don't let her take you away.
Mr. Bryant had a few more comments about the importance of living for God, but Zach just shook his head and looked out the window. He'd heard it all before.
Yeah, he
thought.
That's why you wouldn't let us buy tickets for prom, and why we've missed out on so much fun.
His mom and dad were so enthused about God's promises for the future.
They've been saying Jesus is going to return soon for most of my life. Someday I'll want to have a part in it, but right now there are so many other things on my mind. There's Melissa and university to think about. Plus, I've got to beat Abby on that math exam. And then there's basketball.
Brett Lawson coached the Sterling Scorpions basketball team. In March, the team had almost made it to the provincials. Brett wasn't a high school teacher, but with a shortage of those willing to coach, he had become involved with the school teams when Zach and Jake had entered into grade 9. Over the last 4 years, he had led the Scorpions to many victories, winning the district championship every year. With Zach and Jake returning in September for an extra year of high school, dubbed by some a Super 12 year, they were both determined to keep in shape and go all the way next season.
We've got to make it to the provincials,
Zach told himself.
And next season we have such a good chance.
The twins were captains of the team, and just last week they had been told that Brett had generously sponsored them to attend a basketball camp in the summer.
We'll have professional coaches. It's going to be such an awesome week,
Zach thought to himself.
I'll improve so much, it will give us the edge. And don't forget,
his father continued, winding up his dissertation about where Zach's mind should be.
God's laws and commands aren't there to ruin our lives. They guide us to make choices, to give us true peace of mind and real happiness. Following Christ isn't the path of least resistance, but it is the path with the least regrets.
Chapter 2. The Exercise Routine.
I've got to go to the prom tonight,
Zach told his brother firmly, 5 days after the last performance. The boys were doing their strength exercises in the basement, having just come home from school. It was part of a new plan, now that the musical was over, to get in shape for basketball season. Unfortunately, with Jake's sprained ankle, he had to take it a little easier than Zach. Every day that week after school, they had commenced their workout with strength training, and then Zach ran 5 kilometers while Jake rode his bike.
How can you go to the prom? You don't have a ticket,
Jake asked between push-ups. He had to admit he wished he was going as well.
Miss Allen gave me a ticket today,
Zach replied proudly.
She said there were a couple of cancellations, and she thought I deserved to go. Seriously?
Jake puffed, working hard on the floor. He was jealous, even though, due to the economic downturn, funding for the prom had been cut in half. It wasn't going to be nearly as good as in past years. To save money, the school council had opted to hold the celebration in the high school cafeteria, with the food and nutrition class catering the event. Still, Jake felt he was missing out big time. Everyone else in grade 12 was going.
So you figure it's worth being grounded?
He challenged.
Dad doesn't have to know.
Zach grunted, his arms straining to get past 30 push-ups. Having been so involved in the musical, he had given up rugby season for play practices. He knew it would take time to regain his upper arm strength. The musical had been a huge personal investment for Zach and all the others who had committed to the production. Beating his goal by 1, Zach collapsed wearily on the ground.
Dad and Mom are going over to help the McKinleys tonight. If you can get yourself a ticket, we could both use the homework excuse. Oh, sure,
Jake retorted, getting in position for his next round of push-ups.
For one thing, it's youth group tonight. And secondly, I highly doubt I'll find a ticket in the next few hours. She said there were 2 cancellations.
Heaving his body up and down, Jake thought it through. If his parents were heading out, both he and Zach might get away with going to the prom. Often when their parents left the house to give counseling or visit the elderly, he and Zach had enjoyed the freedom to do as they pleased. Many times it meant a movie night. Living in a household without a television, no Wi-Fi, and only 1 computer in the living room, any DVDs that were watched had to meet everyone's approval. However, when Mom and Dad were out, the twins felt free to make their own choices, or almost. Esther, their younger sister, was usually in on the action, and always promised not to tell as long as they didn't watch anything too bad. That set the bar high. Esther's conscience was easily stirred. She was almost as restrictive as their parents. However, this was all beginning to change with Zach's requisition of a smartphone. Their parents still didn't know all the stuff that Zach could download at school to show to his brother when they were home.
Does Melissa know you're coming?
Jake asked, finishing his second round of push-ups with a loud gasp of
50.
Feeling rather hampered with his weak ankle, Jake was determined to beat Zach in upper body strength.
No, but I'll text her,
Zach replied. He leaned back in a sitting position to do his abdominal exercises.
She's confused between Shane and me,
He muttered, drawing his knees to his chest and extending his arms.
If I can win her over, then maybe she'll come out to youth group and other stuff with me. I don't know why you're so crazy about her.
Jake shrugged as they finished the abs workout and walked towards the stairs. Jake hadn't run up and down the stairs for weeks, but his ankle was getting stronger, and he thought it was worth a try.
I mean, she's a nice girl and everything,
He conceded as he attempted to climb the steps.
But whenever Shane isn't around, she flirts with all the guys. I've heard a few wild stories about her at parties, and apparently she believes in reincarnation. I don't think she'll be interested in coming out to youth group. Whatever,
Zach replied defensively.
She just needs some help sorting things out. Melissa's a very friendly person. She's not a flirt.
Jake shook his head, giving up on the stairs routine. His ankle was still too weak.
Nah, it's flirting,
he said firmly, a little resentful that Melissa never flirted with him, unless she mistook him for Zach. Melissa was the most captivating girl at school. Jake wasn't sure why she often walked right past him, but then again, she hadn't really paid attention to Zach either until the musical. In his heart, Zach knew that Jake was probably right in his assessment, but he hated to admit it. He was drawn to Melissa in a powerful way.
Everything will get sorted out once she's going out with me,
he told himself.
So will you cover for me tonight then?
Zach begged.
But we need you at youth group,
Jake argued feebly, feeling duty-bound to encourage his disinterested brother. He was, after all, half an hour older than Zach, And already baptized.
There are so few of us as it is. Yeah, it's pathetic,
Zach agreed. Joining his brother again for the next exercise, the twins stood at the top of the stairs, flexing their calf muscles, hoping to improve their jumping ability. Jake empathized with the discouragement in his brother's voice. Growing up, they had been involved with an enthusiastic youth group, but unfortunately, many of their friends had moved away, far away, and they weren't planning to come back. It was a sad situation, one that Brett Lawson, their basketball coach, had inadvertently caused.
Uncle James is giving a class tonight on the signs of Christ's return,
Jake told his brother, picking up the 25-kilogram dumbbells.
He'll be kind of disappointed if no one shows up. They should just postpone it,
Zach muttered, skipping fast with the rope. He noticed his brother wince as he squatted with the heavy bar and knew Jake's ankle was causing him pain.
No one will be there. They'll all be at prom. Alan will be there,
Jake reminded him.
Yeah, Alan, Esther, and us. That's about all that ever shows up.
Jake sighed, taking a break from the weights to flex his weak ankle. It was true that Abby, Nathan, and Jerry would most certainly be at the prom. They had been talking about it for weeks. David would likely be at home playing video games. It was all he wanted to do anymore. Pulling on a headband to keep his hair out of his eyes while biking, Jake felt a wave of despair. He wished he knew how to encourage his brother to make the right decision, but he was struggling to know even how to motivate himself. He remembered the days when they couldn't wait to go to youth group. Growing up, it had been their favorite night of the week. A second deep sigh escaped him. Perplexed, Zach looked up at his brother, but Jake headed out the door to get his bike. Wheeling his prize bike out of the garage where he kept it under lock and key, Jake considered his Friday evening options. Should he ask Zach to text Miss Allen and see if there was another spare ticket? It would be a lot of fun to join Zach. His own popularity had increased dramatically since his twin had become the heartthrob of Sterling High. He imagined there might be a lineup of girls eager to dance with him if they couldn't have his brother. Mounting the bicycle, he soon left Zach far behind. He had to lap the town 3 times to equal Zach's 5-kilometer run.
But if Mom and Dad are heading out tonight, they'll be expecting us to give Esther a ride to youth group,
he mused.
We can't both use the homework excuse. Only one of us can get away with sneaking off.
Pondering the matter some more, Jake realized that even if lots of girls wanted to dance with him, they would all be disappointed if he couldn't do the cool moves like his brother. He sighed with regret.
I wish I'd decided to be in the musical. I'd love to dance like that. I bet I'd be just as good if I took lessons.
Suddenly, Jake remembered that Uncle James had asked him to find out who needed a ride to Bible camp. It was only 5 weeks away, and Uncle James would likely ask him about it when he saw him that evening. As one of the youth group leaders, Jake was often given the task of encouraging his peers to be involved. Uncle James and Aunt Sandra were willing to take anyone who wanted to come to camp. In the past 6 years, Jake's whole family had faithfully made the 2-day drive to Manitoulin Island every summer in order to attend the Bible camp. They usually traveled in convoy with Uncle James and Aunt Sandra, camping overnight along the way. It was always a lot of fun and a great family adventure. This year, however, the twins' dad had a course he was taking to upgrade his teaching skills. Disappointed not to be involved, he had offered the family van to Uncle James in the hope that anyone who wanted a ride would be able to come.
I'd better go to class tonight and cover for Zach,
Jake decided with a heavy sigh.
He needs to work things out with Melissa.
Finishing his first lap and catching up with his brother once again, Jake slowed to Zach's running pace.
Hey, Zach,
he asked.
Have you decided whether you're coming to Bible camp this summer? Uncle James needs to know numbers tonight. Are you kidding?
Zach replied incredulously.
Brett's paid for both of us to go to basketball camp that week. It's the same week? Yup, and we need to be there if we're going to make it to the provincials next season.
Zach puffed out, continuing to run hard.
Brett emailed me this morning to say 5 players from the Blackhawks are going. We've got to be there. We're the captains. I didn't know we were going to have to miss Bible camp,
Jake moaned, navigating around a sewer grate. Until now, he hadn't realized the 2 events coincided. Pedaling off quickly to do his next lap, Jake pondered the dilemma.
What will I do? Zach and I are captains. 5 of the Blackhawks are going. They're our main competition. We've got to beat them this year. But I don't want to miss out on Bible camp. Why does it have to be the same week? This stinks.
Chapter 3. Youth Group. Jake drove his youngest sister Esther to Uncle James and Aunt Sandra's place that evening, feeling glum. It was 7 o'clock. Almost all the other grade 12 students would be enjoying a roast beef dinner. He would likely be the only one not attending. Plugging his dad's iPod into the family van receptacle, Jake found a song he liked and turned it up.
"This is my favorite song,"
he told his sister. "I know," she said, braiding her straight brown hair.
"How do you know?"
"Because you play it all the time." Conceding this was probably true, Jake hit the arrow key to take the song back to the start so he could listen without interruption. He loved the music, and the message gave him hope. It was about God's love, how God always takes us back and never stops loving us no matter what we do.
"Heavenly Father, please keep on loving me,"
he prayed silently.
"Even though my heart isn't with you right now, please help me to get my life turned around. I don't know what's wrong with me. I just don't feel the excitement that I should. Please help me care about what your Son did for us and the kingdom that you've promised to send."
Jake's life had been so busy in the last few weeks that he hadn't taken time to pray for anything more than his daily food. Occasionally he managed to have a few thoughts in God's direction, but for some reason he seemed to be caring less and less about it. He wanted to care more, he truly did, but he wasn't quite sure how to make it happen. "So are you going to Jamaica?" Esther asked.
"How did you hear about that?"
"I heard Dad talking to you. He wasn't whispering."
"Nah, I don't think so. Brenda's counting on me and Zach to help him win the provincials next year. Plus, I need to take calculus again and upgrade my marks if I want to get into Dalhousie University."
"But it would be so cool to help Uncle Peter do missionary work," Esther exclaimed. "Imagine a whole year in Jamaica. What an amazing experience. If I was done grade 12, I'd go."
"I don't think I'd be very good at running a kids' vacation Bible camp."
Jake spoke candidly.
"You would, though."
"You'd be fine, Jake. You and Zach used to do all those funny skits for Sunday school, and you organize our youth group."
"And I don't do a very good job,"
Jake replied, flipping his straight, sandy brown hair out of his eyes.
"I spent an hour on the phone tonight trying to convince Abby, David, Nathan, and Jerry to come to the camp this summer, and class tonight, and not one of them was interested."
"Are they working this summer?"
"Aw, Nathan is. He needs money to go to college in September. Jerry is playing soccer and doesn't want to miss even one game. Abby doesn't think she could leave her boyfriend for a whole week. And, well, David doesn't think camp is any fun."
"Well, I want to come," Esther smiled, her blue eyes twinkling. "And I'm sure Alan will as well."
"Yeah, there might be 3 of us."
Jake grimaced uncertainly. He still wasn't entirely sure about his own choice. Driving down Uncle James' long, winding, tree-lined driveway, Esther exclaimed, "Bible camp is my favorite week of the year. How could anyone not enjoy it?" Jake parked near the garage under the pines. They both took a long, deep breath as they stepped out of the van. The pungent sea air along the coast always brought back wonderful childhood memories. Jake would never forget the 2 amazing years his family spent living in this place. Uncle James had invited them to stay there while their dad was in teacher's college and money was tight. The log home sprawled out across a neatly manicured ridge that overlooked the ocean. Aunt Sandra had given it the name Ocean View Lodge. Deep purple trim highlighted the large living room windows, contrasting well with the aging gray exterior. Heavy dark green pines swayed silently in the background, screening from view all the other houses in the vicinity. It was a private and beautiful residence. Grandma Bryant stood at the purple front door smiling, her short white hair gleaming in the golden evening sun. Soft blue eyes shone cheerfully in a face adorned with fine lines and creases. During the 2 years that Jake's family had stayed at Ocean View Lodge, both Grandma and Grandpa Bryant had lived in the in-law suite beside them. Sadly, Grandpa Bryant had passed away 18 months ago. Now Grandma lived alone in the granny flat next to Uncle James and Aunt Sandra.
Hi, Grandma.
Jake and Esther called out. "So good to see you, darlings," she smiled, giving Esther a hug. "Why, I think you're taller than me now." Esther smiled proudly. More like her mother than any of the other children, Esther was tall with a sturdy build. Zach had talked her into playing rugby and often boasted to his friends that she could take down any girl with one arm. "I'm 5'8", Esther told her grandma. "Dad measured me last week." "Goodness, you're definitely taller than I ever was. And you, Jake, you're looking more like your Uncle Peter every day. Sometimes I have to do a double take." Jake grinned and gave her a hug. Grandma had told him he looked like Uncle Peter so many times that he had lost count, but he was always happy to hear it. In Jake's opinion, Uncle Peter Bryant was the best looking in the family. "Where's Zach?" she asked. Jake shrugged.
He had something else on.
"Something more important?"
No, just something else.
Grandma nodded thoughtfully. "Well, come on in. Alan's already here, and Uncle James is just getting his presentation set up." Entering the door, Jake took a whiff of a delicious aroma.
"Aunt Sandra's been baking?"
he remarked hopefully. "Oh, yes, cookies and pizza and frozen yogurt, enough for 20, I'd say." Jake laughed. Aunt Sandra loved to bake, and they always had a feast when they came to her house. Following Esther into the large, airy sitting room with the high cedar ceiling, Jake took a seat beside Alan. Aunt Sandra came over from the kitchen area, greeting everyone warmly and bringing homemade lemonade. Jake stood back up to take the tray from her hands. Aunt Sandra was on the shorter side, with straight dark hair that didn't quite reach her shoulders. She had the prettiest blue eyes that twinkled merrily behind her glasses. Since being married, Uncle James often called her Butts, short for beautiful. When Esther had been younger, she had mistakenly called her Aunt Butts, thinking that was her aunt's name. Tall and lean, with dark speckled gray hair, Uncle James looked up from the laptop he was fiddling with.
"Hey, good to see you all."
He looked around more carefully, his kind brown eyes searching the room.
"No Zach tonight?" "Nope,"
Jake replied, wondering how long he could remain evasive. He took the tray of drinks over to Alan. Almost finished university and in his early 20s, Alan Simons was 6'2", dark-haired, and as per usual, in the early stages of growing a beard. Rumor had it that he hated shaving, which was true, but Alan wasn't crazy about growing a full beard either. He had hired Jake and Zach as occasional workers to help him maintain their uncle's landscaping business for the summer. Uncle Peter and Aunt Jessica, who was Alan's sister, were on long-term missionary work in Jamaica. Leaning over to take one of the cold lemonades off the tray, Alan thanked Jake for the drink and then said,
"Look, if you and Zach are free to help us out tomorrow, that would be great. I know you both have morning jobs and schoolwork, but I can't believe how fast the grass is growing. Derek and I have 12 lawns to cut this weekend." "I'm sure we can help."
Jake smiled. Saturday mornings he had committed to help Brett with his lawns, and Zach always did Ocean View Lodge, but they were both eager for more hours, school assignments or not. Their bank accounts had dwindled fast over the winter. It seemed that Uncle James was having some difficulty getting his laptop to communicate with the projector. As everyone chatted about their week and summer plans, Uncle James tried various combinations of keys to get his presentation up and running. After serving everyone a drink, Jake sat back down. Aunt Sandra took a seat close beside Esther. She was giving Esther cooking lessons whenever they could fit them in. The two of them shared a special camaraderie. The twins were just as appreciative of the lessons, since Esther always brought home her delicious creations. Having married late in life and without any children of their own, Uncle James and Aunt Sandra were especially welcoming to their growing number of nephews and nieces. Everyone loved coming to their house. Sitting back comfortably on the couch, Jake's eyes were drawn to the large wedding picture that hung in the center of the long cedar wall. He would never forget his uncle and aunt's snowy winter wedding held in this very house, or their baptism in the cold lake water a few months before. In a jet-black tuxedo, Uncle James was holding Aunt Sandra in his arms. Snowflakes lay in their dark hair and sparkled on her bouquet of pink roses. The white velvet gown that his aunt was wearing blended into the background snow weighing down the dark pines. In the almost completely black and white picture, Aunt Sandra's eyes shone like blue jewels, and the roses seemed to be painted in pink. Both of them were laughing, and it seemed to Jake that they had been laughing ever since. Standing up, Uncle James looked around at all the empty chairs. His presentation was finally showing up on the screen.
"Just 3 of you tonight?"
he queried thoughtfully.
"I was under the impression that everyone voted for this topic when we made the program last year."
Jake squirmed uneasily. He hoped Uncle James would never find out where everyone else was. He wished he could spare his uncle the hurt. When no explanation was forthcoming, Uncle James shrugged.
"Oh well,"
he remarked, more to himself than to the others.
"I'm sure everyone has a good reason to be someplace else."
Suddenly remembering another question he had for Jake, Uncle James asked,
"Did you find out who's coming with us to Bible camp?" "Those you see here,"
Jake replied, not wanting to explain his own dilemma at such a time.
"And maybe Zach."
Looking up with surprise, Uncle James questioned,
"No one else wants to come to camp? That's surprising."
He looked over at Aunt Sandra.
"And I thought we wouldn't have enough seats in the van." "Actually, I won't be able to come to family camp this year either."
Alan spoke up.
"Someone has to look after the grass and gardens while you're all away. But God willing, I plan to make it out for youth conference in August.
He added with a smile in Jake's direction.
And I'll have extra room in the car if anyone wants to join me.
It wasn't the first time that Alan had encouraged Jake and Zach to join him for conference, but neither twin was keen to do the required 100-page Bible study workbook ahead of time.
Did you remind everyone that family camp is held at a first-rate facility?
Uncle James asked Jake in a half-teasing way.
Did you remind them about their good friends and all the fun times we have every year? Sort of.
Jake smiled.
Manitoulin Camp is a great place to go,
he reflected.
But I'm not sure I would call it a first-rate facility. It doesn't have anything extravagant, unlike the basketball camp. There are plenty of trees and a sports field, but the beach is small and the lake is shallow. I did remind them about beach volleyball.
Aunt Sandra smiled dreamily. I can't wait to hear the loons over the water and the whippoorwills calling out when the sun is setting on the lake. And I love sitting around the campfire at night singing hymns of praise to God. I feel so close to God when we're all together singing like that.
And you wouldn't miss teaching the juniors for anything,
Uncle James added, with an affectionate smile in his wife's direction.
You've been working on those classes for weeks. We'll need Andrew's van just for all those project materials.
That's true. I am looking forward to having fun with all the kids, Aunt Sandra agreed cheerfully. A grade 1 teacher at a little private school, Aunt Sandra loved working with children. She was always researching new crafts and activities. Uncle James had even customized a special room upstairs in the house for her to keep all her supplies organized. I love the campfire sing-alongs too, Esther chimed in. And I love seeing my friends. It's so much fun to talk for hours in the tent at night.
And don't forget the ice cream socials and all the great classes,
Alan added. Ah, yes, Aunt Sandra agreed. I heard that Brother George is speaking on the theme, In the Last Days, Perilous Times Will Come. That sounds very thought-provoking. Jake squirmed. It was thought-provoking, all right. He felt uneasy just hearing the title.
Since this is our last class before summer vacation,
Uncle James said, changing the subject,
I thought I'd show you a few slides of the fun you've all had together over the years.
Jake watched the screen as Uncle James showed pictures of Sunday school picnics and youth group outings from the past. There had been so many children. A sad smile came over Jake's face as he saw pictures of himself, Noah, Brennan, and David in their 10-year-old innocence. Brennan and he had always tried to be on the same team. Noah had always sided with Zach. If he'd ever had a best friend beside his brother, it would have been Brennan. Now they saw each other only at camp. Both Noah's and Brennan's families had moved to Ontario. Jake's older sisters had moved as well to attend the University of Toronto.
Look at David in this picture,
Uncle James pointed out with a chuckle. It was a shot of the candy toss at the Sunday school picnic. Uncle Peter, Jake's dad's youngest brother, had run around with lollipops stuck to his clothes, tossing out candies for the children and trying to keep out of reach of their grasping hands. In the midst of the chaotic picture was David, offering some of his candy to the toddlers who were unable to keep up. David had always been so generous and kind-hearted. Now David spent so much time playing computer games that he didn't want to do anything else or even hang out with his friends. His life revolved around the characters in his fantasy world. His bedroom walls were plastered with posters of fictitious virtual people.
I hoped Abby would see this one,
Uncle James laughed. Jake looked up to see Abby on the screen with 6 first-place ribbons. Her curly auburn hair was up in pigtails and her face was covered with freckles.
She won the Bible quizzes, the sack race, the obstacle course, and the wheelbarrow race. Remember that, Jake?
Jake groaned.
I helped her win the wheelbarrow race,
he retorted. Abby had always been tough competition for him and Zach. She was small and wiry and the strongest girl he'd ever known. He and Zach could outdo her physically now, but Abby still outshone them with her recall of detail. At high school, Zach was vying with her for top marks in math. Lately, she had hooked up with Brian, the high school hockey hero, who often boasted that he could hold more drinks than anyone else on the team. Since then, they had been seeing less and less of Abby at youth group.
I thought Nathan and Jerry would love this one,
Uncle James said with a chuckle. Jake and Alan looked at one another and laughed. The picture was of the 4 of them standing in their pajama pants on a small island, wondering what they should do. Mist hung heavy over the lake, and a large loom was floating past in the water. Jake could well remember the weekend canoe trip 3 years ago. Alan had talked all the younger guys into setting up camp on that same small island just off the shore. While they were sleeping in late on the Saturday morning, the girls who had camped on the mainland quietly paddled over and stole their canoes. Had it been summertime, it would have been no big deal to swim the 100 meters back to shore where a hot breakfast was being served. However, in early October, the lake was frigid, and the morning air temperature was only 7 degrees Celsius. Alan and Jerry had changed into their swim shorts and saved the day, plunging into the icy cold water they brought back a rescue canoe.
Do you have a picture of our revenge?
Alan chuckled. With a grin, Uncle James flashed to his next slide. An overturned canoe bobbed in the lake, with 4 grumpy, half-drowned girls clinging onto it. Being merciful, the boys had delayed the revenge attack until the afternoon air temperature was in the balmy mid-teens. However, there hadn't been a word of thanks for their compassion. Jake took a long look at the picture. Hannah, Noah's younger sister, was in the forefront. Even at 11 years old and half-drowned, she was attractive. Last year at Bible camp, she had followed him around in a rather obvious way. With 3 years between them, Jake had kept his distance. It was a little embarrassing for a 16-year-old to be hanging out with someone who had just entered her teens.
Will it be the same this year?
He asked himself.
Will I feel any different? Never, never take on the guys.
Alan jokingly remarked to Esther.
Unless you're prepared to face the consequences.
It's Abby who does all the scheming, Esther smiled. I just follow orders. There were only a few more slides, and Jake wished the others had been there to see them. Last year, the canoe trip had been quiet and uneventful. The fewer that came, the less fun it was, and the less invigorating it was in a spiritual way. Slowly, gradually, other activities with friends from school had become more compelling. Was there any way to reinvigorate the group?
It's almost impossible,
Jake thought with dismay.
Especially when I don't feel motivated to even change myself.
Chapter 4. Reasons to Believe.
Well, let's begin our class,
Uncle James said after Alan had given an opening prayer.
Let's talk about the important prophecies that have been fulfilled, which indicate that we are on the verge of Christ's return.
Uncle James was a good speaker, and everyone else was listening attentively. But Jake felt himself fading away. He had heard all this so many times. Little did he know that Uncle James was absolutely right. They were on the verge. Jesus Christ's return was only 10 weeks away. Unaware of the urgency, Jake's eyes glazed over as Uncle James went through the usual evidence, beginning with the nation of Israel. In his mind, Jake began comparing his camp options. Manitoulin was a great place to go. He wasn't so sure about the challenging talks on perilous times, but he did want to see his friends. There were plenty of sports, and they always had fun in the lake, even if it was shallow. On the other hand, the basketball camp was truly a first-rate facility. The camp was in a scenic part of Nova Scotia on a lake. There were kayaks, jet skis, and sailboats available for use in the afternoons. He had read in the brochure that there was a zip line and a ropes course in the trees. It would be a full day of exercise and fun. At Bible camp, classes occupied the mornings and evenings, leaving only the afternoons free.
I can go to Manitoulin every year,
he told himself.
But the basketball camp is likely a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and Brett is willing to pay for it all.
Jake's attention was captured momentarily when Uncle James began his visual presentation using old film clips and black and white pictures. He was impressed that his uncle had gone to so much trouble to make his talk interesting. Using shaky old black and white film, Uncle James showed them pictorial evidence of the Zionist movement from the late 1800s and onwards. Turning to the prophecy of Ezekiel in the Bible, Uncle James excitedly pointed out the marvelous way God had predicted thousands of years before that this would occur. The Valley of Dry Bones in Ezekiel 37 foretells the future revival of the Jewish people in the last days. The following chapter goes on to explain that the Jews would once again become a prosperous nation in the land of Israel. Ezekiel 38 describes the Northern Confederacy, which comes against the newly established nation of Israel when they are dwelling safely, without walls, to take a spoil. Chapter 39 prophesies of God's direct intervention to stop the marauding armies from completely destroying everything in their path. Uncle James also read a couple of paragraphs from a few ancient books while he displayed pictures of the authors on the screen. Jake agreed it was remarkable that way back in the 17th and 18th centuries, students of the Bible had clearly understood that certain Old Testament prophecies foretold the Jews would be gathered and established in their homeland before the return of Jesus Christ to the earth. For instance, there were the words of Sir Isaac Newton, famous for discovering the law of gravity, yet not so well known for his prolific writings on religious matters. Uncle James read Sir Isaac Newton's quote,
God's covenant with Abraham, when he promised that his seed should inherit the land of Canaan forever, on this covenant was founded the Jewish religion, as on that is founded the Christian. And therefore this point is of so great moment that it ought to be considered and understood by all men who pretend to the name of Christians. The restoration of the Jewish nation, so much spoken of by the old prophets, reflects not the few Jews who were converted in the apostles' day, but the dispersed nation of the unbelieving Jews to be converted in the end, when the fullness of the Gentiles shall enter. It is when the gospel, upon the fall of Babylon, shall begin to be preached to all nations.
There was also the quote that Jake knew well from John Thomas, writing in the mid-1800s. Uncle James read,
There is then a partial and primary restoration of the Jews before the manifestation of Jesus, which is to serve as the nucleus or basis of future operations in the restoration of the rest of the tribes after he has appeared in his kingdom. The pre-advential colonization of Palestine will be on purely political principles, and the Jewish colonists will return in unbelief of the Messiahship of Jesus and of the truth as it is in him. They will emigrate thither as agriculturalists and traders in the hope of ultimately establishing their commonwealth. Under the efficient protection of the British power, some other power, friendly to Israel, must then have become paramount over the land, which is able to guarantee protection to them and to put the surrounding tribes in fear.
Jake's mind drifted back to the prom. It was almost time for the dance to begin. He could well imagine all the fun that Zach must be having. While Uncle James talked about how miraculous it was for a few 100,000 Jews in 1948 to survive the birth of their new nation, being attacked by millions of hostile Arab enemies, Jake heard only bits and blurbs. He did take notice, however, when his uncle began talking about the future. Ezekiel 38 verse 8 spoke of the invasion of the Northern Confederacy advancing upon the mountains of Israel. War was an exciting topic to Jake, and he did think it would be quite interesting to see it all happen.
The mountains of Israel are in what we call the West Bank area,
Uncle James continued, showing a topographical map on the screen.
The world has put a great deal of pressure on the Jewish people to give the West Bank to the Palestinians. However, we know the Jews must keep this land because the Bible tells us that Israel will be dwelling safely in this very area when they are overrun by the northern invasion. Then there's still time,
Jake mused.
The Jews aren't exactly dwelling safely yet, so there's still more that has to happen. It could easily be years before Jesus returns. Lately,
Uncle James went on to say,
we've seen report after report of the gas finds in Israel. Israel has not only found enough natural gas and oil deposits to be self-sufficient for many, many years, but they will also be able to export. They have found a great treasure, and other nations are eyeing it greedily. There has been much speculation in the past about what great spoil will entice the Northern Confederacy to come down into the Middle East. While we won't know for sure until after the event occurs, it is possible these gas finds could be the enticement, especially considering Russia's ambition to dominate in the exportation of fossil fuel.
So you think Russia will be the leader of the Northern Confederacy? Esther asked.
I certainly do,
Uncle James replied.
I think there is plenty of evidence from ancient historians like Josephus and old maps to prove that this is so. The land of Magog is subject to speculation. The Greeks called the Magogites Scythians. Some maps show the Scythians migrated to the area of Germany and France, while others show the area of southern Russia and eastern Ukraine. What we do know for sure is that the nations which come against Israel will be from the uttermost north.
As Jake's mind wandered between the identification of Magog and his own fanciful thoughts, he randomly drifted off to the novel which he kept hidden under his mattress. There was way too much foul language in the book to leave it lying around where his mum might see it. Plus there had been some gory violence which she would likely question. But other than that, Green Diamonds was full of suspense and great twists in the plot.
Will they catch Raynor?
Jake wondered.
I can't believe he had the nerve to shadow the secret police. I know they're in on the assassination attempt. They've got to be. They were visiting America when the president was gunned down. This is Rayner's first experience in Siberia. He doesn't even understand the language. I'm sure Irina is not someone he can trust. But he doesn't seem to be suspicious of her at all. I hope he doesn't tell her the truth when they go out for dinner.
When Jake tuned in again to the class, Uncle James was speaking about fulfilled prophecy in regards to the European Union. He asked Esther to read from Revelation chapter 17, which says, "The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have received no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those who are with him are called, chosen, and faithful." Once again, Uncle James produced quotations from Bible students writing far in advance of the fulfillment that Revelation and Daniel predicted the nations of Europe would one day unite and willingly give their national power and identity to a central authority which would be masterfully orchestrated by the Roman Catholic Church. He had no shortage of news clippings and magazine articles to demonstrate that the Pope was very much behind uniting Europe and taking the reins of influence. In the future, the false prophet of Revelation chapter 17 would guide the beast toward a final showdown with the Lamb, the Lord Jesus Christ. There was one quote from Thomas Newton, writing in 1832, that Jake had never seen before. His uncle read,
"Now the power of the Pope as a horn or temporal prince, it had been shown, was established in the 8th century, and 1260 years from that time will lead us down to about the year 2000, or about the 6000th year of this world. And there is an old tradition among Jews and Christians that at the end of 6,000 years the Messiah shall come, and the world shall be renewed, the reign of the wicked one shall cease, and the reign of the saints upon the earth shall begin. And don't forget,"
Uncle James told them all, looking directly at Jake,
"most likely, while Europe is still in the process of organizing its new empire, Christ will return, raise the dead, and judge his household. Most likely, before Europe becomes the beast that will oppose Jesus on his throne, there will be the invasion of Israel by the Northern Confederacy, the destruction of that formidable army upon the mountains of Israel, and the cry going out to all the earth to submit to the new king in Jerusalem. We're not sure how much we'll see before we're called away to the judgment seat of Christ. We could easily be called away tonight." "Maybe,"
Jake pondered, pulling his thoughts away from Rayner's dangerous mission to find out who had assassinated the president.
"but it could also start 10 years from now and just happen really fast."
Uncle James went on to talk about the looming economic crisis, the increasingly frequent and devastating natural disasters, the prevalence of superbugs, outbreaks of mob behavior, which are the unclean spirits of demons, and signs in the heavens with the sun, moon, and stars. He had everyone turn to Luke 21 and asked Jake to read some of the verses which said,
"Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes in various places, and famines, and pestilence. And there will be fearful sights and great signs from heaven. And there will be signs in the sun, in the moon, and in the stars, and on the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them from fear and the expectation of those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven will be shaken. Then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory."
Jake felt he could have recited the section. He had heard it so many times from his parents. No doubt stuff was happening that was pointing forward to Jesus' return, but in his mind, that didn't mean the world would end tomorrow. He wondered if Melissa was dancing with Zach. He wondered if he had gone, who might have asked him to dance.
Maybe Kristen. She's pretty. Or perhaps Brianna. It would be fun to dance with either one. And wouldn't it be sweet,
he considered,
if Melissa mistook me for Zach?
The prom fantasy ended abruptly when Uncle James closed the class in prayer. Jake was vaguely aware that his uncle had given some sort of last passionate appeal to encourage them all to change their lives and be ready to meet their Lord Jesus Christ. But Jake had missed it entirely. They all enjoyed Aunt Sandra's delicious frozen yogurt and homemade pizza while they talked about summer plans and activities.
"So you and Zach will be done exams in 3 weeks?"
Alan asked. Alan was Uncle Peter's brother-in-law. Uncle Peter had married Alan's sister, Jessica. He and Derek, a longtime employee, were overseeing Uncle Peter's landscaping company, Eden Tree, while he was away with his family doing missionary work in Jamaica. It was a much scaled-down version of the landscaping company than it had been in the past. For the most part, the crew were only maintaining properties while their boss was away, rather than launching any new projects. Jake and Zach had often worked for their uncle on a part-time basis in years past, so they knew well what was expected.
That's right,
Jake said.
Saturday afternoons are fine, and we can start full-time as soon as we've done exams. And how many weeks do you need off? Is it just the one, or are you going to decide to join me for youth conference? Just the one. Jake nodded, catching Uncle James' glance in his direction. Regardless of which camp he went to, there was only 1 week he was planning to take off. The intensive Bible study workbook was too high a hurdle for Jake. He just didn't have that kind of time to study, at least not in the summer. See you around noon, Alan called out as he headed off home. And make sure you pick up Zach. Don't worry, Jake smiled. When there's money involved, Zach will be there. That smartphone keeps him in the poorhouse. Chapter 5. At Prom. Working diligently on his homework until his parents had left the house, Zach quickly showered, donned his dress-up clothes, and scribbled "sleeping" on a piece of paper. Taping the paper to his bedroom door, he pulled it shut behind him with a smile, fairly certain that his mum would be too kind to disturb him if she returned unexpectedly. Prom was supposed to start at 6:30, and it was 7:45 when Zach headed outside, but he wasn't overly worried if he missed the dinner. Better late than never, he thought to himself happily. It was only a half-hour walk to the high school. When he reached the last street, he met another student, wearing a dark suit and a bright green tie, heading in the same direction. It was Jaden, one of his basketball teammates, one of the best players on the Scorpion team. They had known each other since Jaden's family had immigrated from Kenya 9 years before. Jaden could jump higher than anyone. He could dunk from a standstill. Best of all, he was a Christian and one of the twins' good friends. Snazzy shirt, Jaden commented, his white teeth flashing brightly in his dark face. Are you going to the dance? Yeah, I thought I'd check it out, Zach replied casually. Instinctively, he smoothed the dress shirt and tucked it into his suit pants. It was rather snazzy. A dark crimson red, the shirt had a subtle shine, changed from black to red depending on the way the light hit it. You've never been before, have you? Nah, I wasn't really into dancing before I got involved with a musical. There was a look of admiration on his friend's face. Gotta say, Zach, you're a quick learner. Zach felt smug. He liked the compliment. Then a frown wrinkled Jaden's forehead. You're not going to your youth group tonight? Zach shrugged. I'm just skipping tonight. Just this once. Thought you guys didn't miss youth group for anything. Is Jake coming too? Jake's at youth group, Zach replied. Changing the subject quickly, he asked, Why are you late? Jaden laughed. I'm not late, really. I just spilled gravy all over my shirt at dinner, so I ran home and changed. What's up with you? My parents needed some help, so I got away late, Zach lied. He felt bad lying to his friend. Lies just seemed to slip out before he had a chance to think twice. Walking into the school with his teammate, Zach showed his ticket at the front door. Loud music was blasting from the cafeteria, and he followed the sound. Sterling High wasn't a very large school. There were less than 1,000 students enrolled. Built in the 50s, it was rather run-down and dingy, with not much more than the basic essentials for education. However, the student council had done their best to decorate, hanging blue twinkle lights all over the walls, and lime green streamers over every doorway. Looking around for Melissa, Zach instinctively smoothed back his disheveled, sandy blonde hair. He spotted Abby right away, dancing closely with Brian. What does she see in that guy? He wondered. Sure, Brian was muscular and playing AAA hockey, but he ridiculed school and had a poor work ethic. Abby deserved much better. Zach saw Nathan and Jerry over by the refreshment stand talking to their friends, but he couldn't see Melissa. It didn't take long for the news to spread that Zach Bryant had arrived. Before he had time to even look for a dancing partner, there were 2 girls vying for his attention. Before he had time to dance with each one, another girl asked for a turn. It was fun. He enjoyed the attention.
But the one he really wanted to dance with was Melissa. Where was she? He dared not text her, assuming she was probably with Shane. Eventually, Zach spotted Melissa and Shane at a table. They weren't even dancing. She looked up and caught his eye. With an impish grin, Zach motioned for her to join him. Smiling, she shook her head and turned away. The night wore on, and while Zach had no shortage of dancing partners, he kept his eye on Melissa, hoping he'd get a chance to talk to her alone. When he saw her get up and walk over to the refreshment stand, he made a break for it as well.
Sorry,
he told the blonde girl he was dancing with. He couldn't even remember her name. She had told him, but it hadn't registered.
I need a drink.
Okay, she giggled in a silly way. But I'll be right here if you want to dance again. Zach headed toward Melissa. He got to the table ahead of her and picked up a cup.
Want some?
He asked, dipping the ladle into the bowl of punch. I'd love a drink, she smiled graciously, and so would Shane.
I can't believe you're not dancing,
he remarked, handing her one cup and picking up another. We were, she smiled, speaking quietly. She whispered, Shane hurt his knee. He was, well, trying to do some of the moves you did in the musical, and he sort of fell.
Poor guy,
Zach remarked, trying to sound more sympathetic than he felt.
Are you allowed to take a turn with me?
Melissa hesitated and looked back toward Shane. I'd better not, she said. He's a little uptight about you. She was about to take the drinks back to her table when someone shouted, Hey, here's Vanessa Van Houston and Marco Daronette. What do you say, everyone? Should we ask them to dance? Melissa looked up at Zach with a scared expression, but it didn't take long for the crowd to catch on.
Dance, dance, dance,
they cried out, stomping their feet and clapping their hands. Zach looked over at Shane, who was glaring at him. Such a glare only intensified his eagerness to take up the challenge.
Come on, Melissa,
he encouraged.
It's just for fun. They all want us to.
Zach, I can't, she protested. Shane will kill you. Someone had instructed the disc jockey to play I'll Be Yours. The soft strains of their song began to fill the room. Everyone stood back to give them the floor. Melissa looked over nervously at Shane. A hand clutched Zach's shoulder from behind. He turned to see Jaden.
Don't be a fool, man,
Jaden said in a very serious tone.
You're going to get yourself in lots of trouble.
The crowd called out louder. Zach turned away from his friend and looked down at Melissa.
I'll take the heat,
he assured her.
Let's do this.
Taking her hand, Zach led Melissa into the center. Someone brought over a table, and Zach helped her climb up onto it. The disc jockeys started their song again from the beginning. It had been almost a week since their last performance, but they knew their parts so well that everything flowed just as it had before. Melissa was looking at him once more with that rapturous look that filled him with hope. He locked eyes with her just as they had been told to do in the play. They were a little off time with the whirlybird catch, but they caught back up to do the third twirl perfectly.
1, 2, 3.
Zach kept track mentally as his heart pounded and sweat broke out on his forehead. He didn't try to sing along, and neither did Melissa. There was something different in the performance this time. Zach wasn't pretending. This was for real.
Step up, step back, spin forwards, spin back, lift, hold, twirl. 1, 2, 3. Slide her down, balance, turn, face each other, spin away.
They ended their dance as the music faded, face to face, but Zach didn't bend forward to give her a kiss. He knew he was pushing his luck already. The crowds called out for more, and Zach would have willingly obliged, but he didn't dare. However, he whispered,
I love you,
before letting go of her hands. There was a great deal of applause and lots of calls for an encore, but Zach shook his head. Enough was enough. Now he had to face Shane. Not that he was afraid or anything like that. He was in far better shape than Shane, even before Shane had injured his knee. But still, there was no sense adding to the already agitated situation. Walking past where Shane was sitting, he waved, gave a congenial smile, and said,
Hey, no hard feelings, right?
Glaring back, Shane grunted.
We'll see about that.
He added a few more words, which were certainly not conciliatory. Content to have had his time with Melissa, Zach wasn't worried about Shane's threatening demeanor.
Sorry, we had to please the crowd.
He shrugged, and then headed off as far from Shane as possible. For the rest of the evening, Zach kept his distance. He attempted to show several eager girls how to do some of the moves that he and Melissa had performed. Occasionally, he looked over at Melissa. Frequently, he caught her eye.
Poor girl,
he thought.
She has to miss out on all this fun to stick by Shane. I hope she soon figures out that she'd rather be with me.
It was after 10:30 when Zach left the high school. The moon was only a tiny sliver in the sky, and the streetlight in front of the school had burned out long ago. Most of the students had already departed to attend various parties across town. Melissa and Shane had left before 10, and Zach wondered what party they were going to. He had intended to leave earlier himself in order to get home before his parents arrived, but became entrenched in a conversation with a former rugby teammate. Crossing the road and heading for home, Zach suddenly heard a rustle and footsteps close by. Out of the shadows stepped Shane and a few of his buddies.
"Moving in on my girl?"
Shane challenged as he and his 4 friends drew near, very near.
"I told you, I was just giving in to the pressure from the crowd,"
Zach replied with a nonchalant air, yet feeling apprehensive. He had figured he could take on Shane, but he hadn't counted on 4 other guys as well. One of them was Trent, a rugby heavyweight and close to 150 kilos. He was a great guy to have on the school team, Zach had always thought, but not someone he'd planned to oppose.
"You might think that you're a duo with Vanessa Van Houston,"
Shane smirked.
"but Melissa Phillipson belongs to me. Is that clear?"
All 5 guys were standing aggressively close. Trent shoved his shoulder against Zach, knocking him somewhat off balance.
"If that's what Melissa wants, then that's fine by me,"
Zach replied defiantly. Shane quickly motioned to Trent, and before Zach had a chance to put up any self-defense, Trent sucker-punched him. The hits were hard and furious and knocked Zach to the ground. Desperately, he tried to hoist himself back to his feet, but then he saw a massive boot coming toward his face. Instinctively, Zach wrapped his arms around his head. The blow felt like a sledgehammer, smashing into his upper arm and grazing harshly against his skull. He didn't get a chance to block the second kick.